to the Bedworth Physical Activity Hub update. Councillor Markham.
Thank you, Chair. This report provides an update in relation to the Bedworth Physical Activity Hub. Following notification from the contractors that the revised costs to deliver the overall project are now £34 million, this brings an increase of between 6 and 7 million. And this increase is due to many inflationary changes worldwide and the impact this has had on utilities, construction, costs and supply chains. Also, preemptive ground investigation findings have added to this increase. It is therefore recommended that the Borough Council delay any further work on the Bedworth Physical Activity Hub whilst we identify any further potential funding options, and they ask for approval of the recommendations 1 to 6 as printed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Markham, and I will second the recommendations from the Chair. Any non-Cabinet member? Councillor Condacor.
It seems improbable that we could ever do this for £24.7 million, which is the original budget. There's a similar leisure centre in Dover, which is done by the same contractors, the same architects and the same builders 5 years ago that cost £26 million. We were really very optimistic in building such a vast leisure centre with all its wonderful facilities for the amount of budget predicted. And as councillors, we were getting monthly updates at the beginning from Mr Hollis, telling us how it was going, and these seem to have stopped in July. And it is clear that the project has been in serious financial trouble for some 6 months. And it is very sad that it's got so far and so much money has been spent before we've actually brought it to a halt. It was clearly over-optimistic. We do really need the leisure centre in Bedworth replacing. Everyone for many years at scrutiny has all said we need a leisure centre replacement for Bedworth. But the project has got too expensive, too gold-plated, and I'm really concerned that this project was pulled so late where we've actually spent so much money on design, when we knew in March last year that the inflation of construction costs was very high. We knew in March last year about the material shortages and things already. Yeah, although this crisis has got bigger and bigger, we have known for some time about the problems of Brexit pushing prices up in labour. And I really want it looked at why we got in this mess of having what was probably a £36 million project, because it says 34 million after value engineering. So I don't know what the final quote was. And we should know that the Miners' Welfare Park was built on a mine. We should know we're going to find mine workings and ground problems. So I really think we failed to learn the lessons from the climbing wall, Gresham Road, and we've done another project where we've been grossly over-optimistic. And reality has now dawned that it's not just a little over budget, it's actually 10 million over budget. 24 million to 34 million, that's £10 million.
Any points of clarification on what Councillor Condacor has said? Anything that officers wish to come back on? You do have a mic there if you need one.
Thank you, Chair. I would point out in terms of clarification that the estimate that was provided in March 2022 was prior to any world changes in terms of Russia and Ukraine. That was the cost estimated by the project management team at that time. And in terms of the cost that we've recently had, which was prior to Christmas, that was again based on the costs for REBA stage 4A and 4B. So there is a process to follow in terms of REBA and the stages, and we have to follow those in terms of making that process. So there wasn't a known funding gap until the contractor provided their CSA in late October, early November, at which time then we were doing the value engineering. So the costs weren't known up until then. The costs were identified and presented to Cabinet and Council in February, March 2022 as to the budgeted figure. They were being presented to our funders, and at that time that was the budget, and we were confident that we could deliver that. Obviously things have changed since March 22, and inflation and everything else has caused that a significant problem. We are not alone in that, Chair. There are a number of other projects across the country, and likewise in terms of inflation has increased in spiralling costs. So in terms of clarifying that was where we were in March, and that's where we are just before Christmas last year. Thank you, Chair.
Mr Davies, the Chief Executive.
Thank you, Chair. Just to add to that as well, I would remind members that the original cost estimate plan and the original designs and the legitimacy of that cost estimate plan were all discussed with significant input from Sport England. And that was crucially important that, as with most borough or district councils, we don't build something like this very often. Sport England are involved in this type of project all the time, so we felt it was really important to have their input into that, and they were extremely helpful, and their view was that the cost estimates that were produced at the various REBA stages were sound. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Brent. As a seconder, I would like to say a few things about this. So, of course, it's disappointing that we're having to bring this report forwards. We would like to be cracking on with building the new leisure centre, and I know officers want to crack on with doing that just as much as we, as a cabinet and controlling group, want to get on with building a new leisure centre in Bedworth, because it was only this administration that actually worked to bring forwards the funding for doing so. With the Levelling Up Fund bid that we submitted as quickly as we possibly could do upon taking control in May 2021. It is a complete fallacy to say that these costs were known in March. If you had, I would suggest that you were clairvoyant and should be putting numbers on the National Lottery, because no one could have predicted the inflationary pressures that we are facing. No one knew that Putin was going to invade the Ukraine in February, March, and that we would still be going on with that conflict now, and all the disruption that that is causing to the energy supply chain, the materials supply chain, and also the consequences that that has had with the pay awards and the pay increases which are being negotiated across both the public and the private sector. Nobody could have foreseen that, and I think if Councillor Condacor is trying to suggest that he could, I think he is actually misleading Cabinet and, more importantly, residents about that. Yet again, he is misleading about gold plating. This has never, ever been a gold-plated project. We have put in what we believe the residents of Bedworth would like, and at every stage we have considered whether it is appropriate to have different facilities in there. Indeed, I believe 4 or 5 months ago, or it may be longer, a decision was made to change the type of lining of the pool from, was it steel to concrete or the other way around? Steel to concrete. Thank you, Kevin, for confirming that, because it would save money as part of the process. And we have been talking with the contractors about that. And we have been working up the plans and having the discussions and doing the exploratory work, all of which requires money, and we have had to draw that down from DLUC as part of the Levelling Up Fund. Yes, we know that there is a former industrial use to the land, but no one knows what the exact topography of the land is underneath, and that is why officers, far from being reckless and cavalier with this, they were very prudent and very safe, and brought forward the land exploration ahead of where it would normally be in the REBA stages, which are the accepted industry standards, and actually dug exploratory trenches in the proposed development area to see what the lay of the land underneath there was. And having seen some of the photos which have been produced, I am concerned that if that was disrupted or interfered with in any way, it could cause either damage to the local wildlife, or if it was to somehow by accident get in contact with humans, then that could cause significant health issues for the residents of Nuneaton and Bedworth. So far from being reckless and profligate, we have done exactly the right thing at the right time, in my view. Now, yes, it is disappointing that we are where we currently are, but Cabinet have been working extremely hard with officers to examine our options, and we are looking at negotiating or contacting any potential partner for additional funding. And in fact, one of the conditions of the recommendations that we had put in consultation with officers is the recommendation that power is delegated to the respective director, Mr. Hollis, with consultation with the portfolio holder, that if we do find someone that is willing to fund us, if we put in an application, they have authority there and then to put in that application, rather than have to wait for permission to come back to Cabinet and the resulting delay that could potentially bring. We want to get on with the job of delivering the Bedworth Physical Activity Hub, and we will examine all the other options with there as well, because we remain committed, wherever possible, to strain every sinew and get this leisure centre built. But we are a responsible Cabinet and a responsible administration, and we will not put any additional borrowing costs onto this council which we cannot sustain and afford. And that is something that the member opposite has been banging on about for successive meeting after meeting, completely erroneously, because we have never ever committed to borrowing that we couldn't sustain. And that is exactly why we have listened to professional advice that if we were to borrow the remaining gap, it would be unsustainable on the budgetary pressures. So we have done the responsible thing at every single step of this process. And to say otherwise is misleading residents and actually scaremongering, which I think is the worst and lowest form of politics. So, any other Cabinet member wish to speak? No? In which case we will move to the vote. All those in favour of the recommendations, please show. That is carried. Thank you very much.